Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Massive day for the USC fans. Late Thursday night, Lincoln Riley, USC releasing the first official depth chart heading into week one against LSU. And this is an exciting day for USC fans because you look at all the turnover that's gone on with this USC program, not only the coaching staff, but all the new players, all of the different position battles that we saw play out during the last couple months. Now we get our answer. Like now we get a feel for what this USC team is going to look like Sunday night against LSU. Now, want to get into, I think, a few things that we kind of knew, but then a few surprises that were kind of thrown into the depth chart as well. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the USC fans, it's been a blast talking this program all summer long. The amount of support y'all have continued to show it means the absolute world. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear your biggest takeaways from this USC depth chart. And without further ado, let's get into it. And I want to start, not normally, we normally would start at the quarterback spot and kind of work our way down. I want to start in the defensive back room, where I'll kind of put my hand up and say a lot of the USC fans in the comment section, you guys were right. I thought John Humphrey, DeCarlos Nicholson coming in through the transfer portal, I kind of penciled them in to be starters in the Stan Lynn defense. And you look at Jalen Smith and you look at Jacoby Covington, a lot of you guys saying, hey, they played really good football towards the back half of that year, specifically in the bowl game against Louisville. Those kids can play. And we always knew that they were going to be deep and competitive in the cornerback room. But I kind of chalked up to Carlos Nicholson and John Humphrey as being the starters. And, I still would expect to see both of those cornerbacks play week one against LSU. But I think that says more about Jalen Smith and Jacoby Covington, because I look at it and say, I know John Humphrey is a really good football player. Gave up only a 54% completion percentage last year in coverage, only missed 6% of his tackles. I know DeCarlos Nicholson, coming over from the SEC, is a good football player because we've seen it with our own two eyes in one of the best conferences in the country. So you look at Jalen Smith and Jacoby Covington beating those two out and say, those guys must be damn good football players. And so if I'm USC, I'm kind of quietly excited to see some of the guys that were on this team last year winning starting roles heading into 2024. I think it also speaks a little bit to the cross training that we've seen D'Anton Lynn and Doug Bell talk about. I think Jalen Smith was kind of penciled in the preseason to play that nickel cornerback spot. Now, I'm a massive fan of Greedy Vance. I'm not surprised he kind of won that battle. I think Greedy Vance is going to be a dude for USC. But because you cross-train your guys, you can say, hey, if Jalen Smith's one of our best cornerbacks, we'll get him on the field. We'll teach him how to play the boundary. And that's exactly what USC did. I think that's going to be a really fascinating position to watch, because we kind of talked about it. If there's the most important matchup in this football game, I think it is, these cornerbacks holding up on islands against really good LSU wide receivers, because I would foresee D'Anton Lynn getting really aggressive in terms of the allocation of bodies into the tackle box to stop an LSU team that is going to want to run the football behind a really good offensive line. So these cornerbacks are going to be tested. It's going to be a huge game for them against some good wide receivers. And it kind of fired up to see guys like Jacoby Covington and Jalen Smith win out for some starting jobs. Going to the linebacker spot, no real surprise. We kind of knew the three main linebackers of this defense: Easton Mascarenas, Arnold, Mason Cobb, and Eric Gentry. It's nice to see Desmond Stevens and Elijah Newby kind of make that 2 and 3 deep, because I think those are really good freshmen that probably don't play a ton week one, because I don't know if you want to go up against an LSU defense that's going to give you a lot of different looks and play true freshmen. That being said, I would certainly keep my eyes out on both of those young backers, because I think they're really good. Now, moving to the defensive line, I don't think we're surprised by Jamil Muhammad and Anthony Lucas starting at edge. You're going to see a lot of Braylon Shelby. I think one of the bigger takeaways for me was Devin Tompkins going to play that edge role at the defensive end spot. We kind of heard a lot of talk about him being 285 pounds and working on the inside. I think two takeaways here. One, maybe USC feels a lot better about the depth on the inside of the defensive line than a lot of people gave them credit for, because if they did not feel that way, they'd probably play Devin Tompkins on the inside. And maybe specifically for this matchup against LSU, where LSU wants to run the football, maybe it makes sense to go with a bigger, heavier-handed edge rushing unit like a guy like Devin Tompkins, who is becoming very strong at the point of attack. He's not quite big enough to play on the inside, but at 285 pounds, he can certainly be that heavy-handed edge rusher that can be a really big presence in the run game. I don't think we're too surprised about the defensive end depth chart. It's nice to see Cam Fountain make kind of that depth chart list. On the inside, I think the biggest probably surprise would be the or designation with Gavin Mayer and Bear Alexander. Bear Alexander is going to play the most on the inside of the defensive line. And I think if you're reading into it positively, Gavin Mayer's ready to go. Like, we're going to give Gavin Mayer the or designation with our best defensive lineman on the football field. I think that speaks a little bit more to Gavin Mayer than it does Bear Alexander. Like, look, we know what Bear Alexander is. Yes, did Lincoln Riley say he needs to find a little bit more consistency? Yeah, absolutely. But we know that Gavin Mayer now is going to come in and probably give you some really good reps on the inside of the defensive line. So you talk about, kind of formulating a two deep here. I think you got five guys you trust, right? Bear and Gavin, Nate Clifton, Kobe Pepe, and Elijah Hughes. Gita Abisaria, I think the jury's still out. I'd be surprised if we see a ton of him against LSU week one, but if you can go into that matchup with five guys that you kind of feel good about, it's a heck of a lot better than we were feeling 5 months ago about the inside of the defensive line, where it's about Bear Alexander, Elijah Hughes, and Nate Clifton. We weren't even sure if he was going to play on the inside. And so I think for USC fans, you're probably feeling a little bit better there. Now, that's probably some of the bigger, I wouldn't even say surprises, but bigger storylines of this official depth chart coming out. Moving to the wide receiver spot, I'm not too surprised to see a couple of oars with Kyron Hudson, who I think is a really good football player, just kind of getting drowned out by four extremely talented sophomores. Kyle Ford getting the oar with Jacoby Lane, maybe a little surprising. I would think that has a lot more to do with, hey, we know Lincoln Riley probably wants to rotate 6 or 7 wide receivers. And I think this depth chart is just telling us the 6 or 7 guys are going to be the 4 sophomores, and then Kyron Hudson, Kyle Ford, and I would probably project Jay Fair to play a decent amount of football for USC week 1 against LSU. We've talked about this. We think USC is going to play a lot of 4 wide this week. You kind of look what I kind of view what Colorado just did against North Dakota State, kind of similar to what USC is going to do, where one, you look at your personnel and say, look, we want to get these wide receivers on the football field because they're our best players. They're our most dynamic players on offense. And again, it's not a shot at guys like Lake McCree. It's a little bit just more giving respect to the amount of talent I think is in this wide receiver room. But I think more importantly, I think for going up against a defense like LSU, you want to get them in space. And you look at Colorado, why they had so much success on the offensive side of football. They said, hey, we're going to play 4 wide. We're going to make you operate in the secondary in space. That's where this LSU secondary struggled in 2023. And so I think that's what USC is going to be trying to do on this against this LSU defense Sunday night in Las Vegas. You move to the offensive line, no surprises there, right? The 4 guys that we knew were starters are starters. I think the big question is, who do we see at right guard? I would guess it's going to be Alani Noah. But you got some two really big bodies, right? Alani Noah, Amos Talatele. I hope I said that name right. Those are big bodies at right guard. 2 guys that we feel pretty good about. One of the questions I saw on Twitter was not a USC fan, was saying, I'm concerned about the depth at tackle for USC. I think that's probably fair, right? You have 2 redshirt freshmen that haven't played a ton of football during their collegiate career. I think for people within the USC program, and I mean, obviously, knock on wood, if somebody were to go down at the tackle spot, I would be extremely surprised if they just didn't kick Jonah back up tackle instead of play the redshirt freshman. And so if you do have to get into your depth at tackle, it's, hey, Jonah, we're going to take you from center. We know you can play both sides of the tackle spots at a very high level, and we're going to kind of fill in with Keelan or Gino at center. That's kind of what I would project this USC offensive line rotation to be. I look at this offensive line and say, specifically on the left side, I think it can be a really good unit. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if USC really leans on that unit running the football. Miller Moss starting quarterback, Woody Marks starting running back, not surprised. I think you're going to see kind of a 1A, 1B in terms of Woody Marks and Quentin Joyner. I think the last surprise was the tight end position, where you don't see Joey Olsen even on the depth chart. True freshman Walker Lyons, he's getting a nod. It's surprising. Joey Olsen was one of my guys in the offseason. It sounded like he had a phenomenal offseason where he maintained the athleticism he had in high school, put on some weight. I wonder if we see Joey Olsen a little bit down the line. And again, it's a lot to ask for a true freshman to start at tight end because there are a lot of different responsibilities and parts of the game that you kind of have to be accountable for at the tight end spot. And so you don't normally see a ton of true freshmen unless you're freaky like Brock Bowers, starting early and playing early as a freshman tight end. And again, not a shot at Lake McCree. I'd be surprised if we see the tight end position a ton in this football game, just because I think USC wants to get this LSU secondary in space. Those are kind of the big surprises. Wanted to hop on, talk about what we saw. I think the position battles that we were curious about, we get our answers with no or. Shout out Lincoln Riley. No or designations or nothing. We're just going to tell you who we're going to play. I think that's better for the fans. I wish, as a Michigan fan, like Michigan doesn't do that, and it's frustrating. So for USC, we got some answers. Now it's time to go play football Sunday night. Really excited for that game. We'll close it out there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.